Hi guys, today we are reading Poison in the Colony, chapter 33. Mum is not surprised to hear that I have traveled with the very men she told me not to travel with. She says I am becoming a difficult child to raise. I apologize to her as best I can. At least she realizes it is the knowing that is behind all of this, and not just me being a disobedient daughter. Above all, she is relieved that I am home safe. I am thankful to be back home, to wash the clothes I live in day and night, and to be with my whole family again. Mom and the girls are very glad I brought Daw back for a visit. Alice proudly shows him the fading purple on her leg where the snake bit her. You're a brave girl, Alice, Dad says. I know, says Alice. Catherine shows Daw her leg too, even though there isn't anything to see. My mind will not let me be. It goes in circles, waging a heated argument between me and me. Samuel can't get here. You need to just go to the Governor Yearly yourself. I would never be able to explain how I know these things without confessing to the second sight. Then I will be hanged as a witch. So, give your life to save the colony. If I could be sure it would be that simple, I would do it. But what if Governor Yearly doesn't believe me? Then my life will be wasted, and the colony will perish as well. You have to take the risk. If you do nothing, then death for the colony is certain. Or what if he believes me, but the accusations of witchcraft spread to Mom? Then my little sisters would lose their mother. I can't let that happen. So you're just gonna sit here doing nothing while the natives stir their pots of poison, ready to bring it to the colony mixed with inbred and stew and... Be quiet. You're no help at all. Well, what are you gonna do? This argument has no ending point and no good answers. All I know is that I must be who I am, nothing more and nothing less. I am not a gentleman who can speak with authority, nor a leader who can make decisions. I'm only a girl God has chosen to know something the gentlemen and leaders do not know. If God leads me to speak the warning myself and lay down my life for the colony, I will do it. But in the meantime, with no natives coming to the fort with food for us, I will wait and hope for a better way. The next day is Sunday. When church services are over, Bermuda's father gives us the news. Bermuda has finally been accepted as apprentice at the tar pits. After our midday meal, Mom gives me permission to go visit Bermuda and his family. I walk through swirling wind to the Eason's cottage. The sky is still gray with low clouds, and I can smell snow in the air. Mrs. Eason welcomes me into their warm cottage. Bermuda is very excited about his new job. Now, when they start up the glass house again, I can switch to being an apprentice there, he tells me. Well, you badgered those Polish workers until they let you become an apprentice, so maybe you can find someone to badger until they start up the glass house again, I say. Mrs. Easton offers me a cup of hot tea, which makes me feel very grown up. Mr. Easton is cleaning his musket and smoking his pipe, filling the small cottage with tobacco smoke. I blink in the haze and think maybe I agree with King James about the evils of tobacco. I like Mr. Easton very much. He has already claimed his land at Martin's Hundred, just a few miles down the river from Jamestown. He travels there to work on his house and land, but since it's so close, he returns home often. Have I told you about the night we saw St. Elmo's fire? Mr. Easton asked me between puffs on his pipe. He has, and it is a wondrous story. I would love to hear it, I say. Bermuda settles in at the table with me to listen and Mrs. Eason puts us to work shelling corn off dry cobs. I've never seen such a storm, Mr. Eason begins. For 4 days and nights, the ship tossed like wild horse, wind howling, rain coming sideways so hard I could scarcely open my eyes. We dropped the sails just before the waves got so big they'd have capsized us for sure. Behind the story is the crackle of the fire, the tick-tack-tock of our corn kernels dropping into the bowl as we break them off the cob with our thumbs, the creaking of the cottage in the February wind. But in my imagination, I'm on a ship in the tropics, in a rolling storm at sea. With the sails down, the wind caught the rigging and set up high wailing like 1,000 ghosts lost in purgatory. I shudder. Bermuda looks at me and gives me a devilish grin. He has heard this story 100 times and enjoys seeing other victims scared by it. I thought for sure we would die. Mr. Eason's voice rises. We all thought we would die, drowned and lost forever, our bodies torn apart and eaten by sharks. I stop shelling and hold my breath, anticipating the next part. That's when we saw it. Mr. Eason's voice goes low and mysterious. It started as a soft glow up atop the mast. I thought maybe I was already dead, seeing the light of my Lord. But no, the others around me saw it too, and there were shouts and gasps, even some cursing from the rougher sort. The glow grew brighter and bigger, floating there atop the mast until men dropped to their knees and begged God for forgiveness for whatever evil they'd done in their lives. I closed my eyes to better see that glow in my imagination. A ball of fire, holding out hope of safety and salvation. It hung there, like it would set fire to the rigging, though it never did, and the storm raged on. Bermuda piped up. That's when you made God a promise about me, right, Doc? That's right, Mr. Eason says. I promised God that if I could live long enough to see my child born, I would make sure to tell the story and scare all of his friends. I snicker and Bermuda rolls his eyes. Mrs. Eason says, Edward, that is not what you promised. That's true, Mr. Eason says. I promised that I would make sure he got to go fishing every Sunday. Duh, Bermuda objects. Tell the real promise. Mr. Eason takes a puff on his pipe and blows a smoke ring into the air. I promised God that if I could live to see my child born, I would love and protect him my whole life. Bermuda grins. It's his favorite part of the story. But the storm only got worse, Mr. Eason continues. The sea washed over the deck and gushed into the hull, full of holes as it was by then. Every man and woman, sailor and passenger alike, worked to pump and bail and plunge the holes with whatever we could, even meat from the larder. We threw our trunks and barrels overboard, hoping to lighten the ship. Then, just before dawn on the 4th day, I saw the twinkling of a star. I felt the wind blow a little less hard. I sensed that the rolling of the ship had settled down. And when I heard the shout, "Land ho!" I knew we were saved. Tell how I got my name, Bermuda says. Well, of course, because the land we sighted was the island of Bermuda, and that's where you were born, Mr. Eason says. Tell about the play and that Mr. Shakespeare, Mrs. Eason urges him. I've heard it before, but I certainly don't mind hearing it again. How the writer William Shakespeare heard of the storm and shipwreck of the Sea Venture and wrote a play about it. He called it The Tempest, and it was performed in the theater in London. Those actors who played it on stage should have been the real Tempest, Mr. Eason says. They know nothing of what it was truly like. There's a knock at the door, and when Mrs. Eason opens it, snow swirls into the cottage. It is Chopook carrying a basket. "Come in out of the snow," Mrs. Eason says cheerily. I stare at Chopook's basket. My stomach tenses. Chopook's family members, who still live in the Indian village, often give him things they have made, like clay pots or bowls, or food when they know we need it. Since Chopook speaks our language, he is chosen to do the trading. He trades for what we have, like cotton clothing or metal tools. I hold my breath, waiting to see what's in the basket. The adults make polite small talk. Then Chopook lifts a piece of deer skin off his basket and asks, "Dried venison? You want?" "No!" I shouted. Everyone looks at me. I stammer, not knowing what to say. "I just think we have plenty of food, right, Mrs. Eason?" But Mrs. Eason has her fist on her hips. "Well, Virginia, I know there are some who think they are high and mighty. They won't eat what the natives bring, but that is not us." "I didn't," I began, "but I have no way to defend myself. My family would never refuse food from the natives. Until now. Suddenly, I know what I have to do. I need to touch Chopook to see if he has any malice in him. Sure, if the meat were poisoned, he would have been warned not to eat any of it. I step over near him, as though I need a better look at the meat. Carefully, I brush his hand. I feel calmness, eagerness, interest, but no malice. I am relieved. In the next moment, Chopook surprises me. He lightly brushes my hand. I feel something new this time, something I can't quite grasp. It's like a little admiration, but not quite. Then I look up at him and I see in his eyes, it's attraction. He thinks I'm pretty. I feel my face flush bright red and I scurry back to my chair. I sit very still, looking straight ahead. "Do you approve, Virginia?" Mrs. Eason asked me teasingly. "Are we allowed to trade for some meat?" I have a quick nod, keeping my eyes on the far wall. "What's wrong with her?" Bermuda asked. "Nothing is wrong with me," I snap. Mr. and Mrs. Eason discussed the trade with Chopook. Would he like a pair of woolen socks Mrs. Eason just knitted? Chopook points to his bare feet and shakes his head. They settle on a piece of flattened iron, excellent for making into a tool for the whole basket of meat. After Chopook leaves, Bermuda and I finish shelling the pile of corn while discussing how best to catch crayfish for fishing bait. At least he doesn't think I'm pretty. "Virginia, isn't it time for you to be helping your mother?" Mrs. Eason asked after a while. I agree. I wrap my shawl around my shoulders and step out into the swirling snow. As I walk home, I think of how if I could touch each person who offers us food, I would find the poison. Could keep us safe if I were allowed to do that. But it would be impossible to tell this to anyone and keep me safe. And there are too many plantations and towns now. I can't be at all of them. For a moment, I stop walking and close my eyes tightly. I don't want the argument in my head to start up again. "I will give my life if that's what you ask," I whisper. Then I open my eyes and walk through the falling snow back to our